So good evening everybody and welcome to the PCSE and NHS Pensions webinar that we've created for locum GPs who are completing locum work in England. We've created this webinar on the back of a webinar that we completed recently in June, but this time around we are looking to have our NHS Pension and BMA colleagues join us this evening, which we are truly grateful for. Okay, so just to quickly run through some introductions for this evening. So our NHS Pensions colleagues, we've got Vicky Woolley and Saf Khan, who are stakeholder engagement for our NHS Pensions. And PCSE colleagues, we've got Katrina Veneres, who works in the PCSE Pensions team, and then myself, Debbie Roberts, and my colleague Kat, who's helping out in the background, are from the PCSE Communications team. And also joining us this evening are some BMA colleagues. So we've got Krishan Agwal, who's the Deputy Chair of the Pensions Committee, and Mark Cawley, who is on the BMA Sessional Committee. So Mark and Krishan from the BMA are joining us to support in the background, just to ensure that we ask a good variety of questions during the live Q&A. And Mark has very kindly created some videos of him completing locum forms in PCSE Online. So as you can see, we've got a packed agenda this evening. This is in no particular order, but our NHS pension colleagues will be covering what locum work is. They will be discussing the 10-week rule, completing Locum A and B forms, and discussing what work is pensionable. The BMA, so as discussed earlier, they have kindly provided some videos of Mark completing the Locum A and B forms and also him recording the income stream. And PCSE, I will run through the Locum A approval, the practice side, just to show you what happens there. And then Katrina will run through some questions that we've had from the last webinar and discuss things such as submitting forms in PCSE Online and being able to make payments through PCSE Online. And then at the end, we'll run through some frequently asked questions and then we'll open it up to a live Q&A. Okay, so we wanted to start the webinar just to run through the responsibilities. Now, there are 4 key parties that are involved in the administration for locum pension processes. Now, we have the locum GP, we have the practice, PCSE and NHS Pensions. So the locum GP, you'll be responsible for completing the work, and then once that work's complete, submitting a Locum A form for any pensionable work, submitting Locum A and B forms to PCSE, and then paying your contributions to NHS England. Now, once you've submitted your Locum A form, it's then down to the practice to approve the forms, just making sure that all the aspects of the locum work and fees earned are correct. PCSE's responsibility is to update PCSE Online with the latest pension forms as per the NHS Pensions website and reconcile all payments made to NHS England with declared pensionable earnings. And NHS Pensions enforce the regulations set by the Department of Health and Social Care, and then they release all the GP pension forms onto their website for you to use. And only once they have received all the information from you and PCSE, they can then generate the total reward statement. Okay, so that's enough from me now. I'm now going to hand over to Vicky from our NHS Pensions team. So yeah, thanks Vicky.
Thanks Debbie. Perfect, thank you. So in the NHS pension scheme, we categorise locum work as deputising for an absent practice-based GP, temporary work or completing appraisals. As a GP locum, you can decide whether the work you do is to be pensioned or not, and you must inform the practice at the outset that you are intending on pensioning the work. You must then complete the Locum A and B forms as Debbie's just mentioned. As a GP locum, the pensionable element of the fee is 90% excluding the employer contributions. And if you do not want to pension your locum work, then you must tell the practice. This is because you'll be paid a 14.3% employer contribution alongside a 0.08% administration charge in addition to your fee. If you receive this and then you choose not to pension that income and that period of work, then you must return this to the practice as soon as possible. And any GP locum in England, the administration is completed by PCSE. With the 10-week rule, the NHS pensions regulations state that you cannot pension a period of locum work that ended more than 10 weeks ago, and any forms received into PCSE after those 10 weeks that period of employment cannot be pensionable and it will be rejected. The 10 weeks will start at the end of the period of engagement. So, for example, if you were to work the 2nd to the 6th of October, you have 10 weeks from the 6th of October to submit the forms and the payment. You must pay both your employee and the employer contributions to PCSE. And if you are submitting one invoice to a surgery for several individual sessions or days worked in that month, then you are to list all the individual sessions or the days on the same form. You do not need to complete a separate Form A for each session or day within the same month, provided they are covered under one invoice or fee. If, however, you invoice the same surgery for individual sessions or days, then you must complete a separate Form A on each occasion. For example, after each Monday to Wednesday session, if you send the fee to the practice after each session, then you would record those separately. If your work spans 2 calendar months with no breaks, then you must record and invoice each month separately. Form A is used for the work that you have done within that commissioning body, and you must complete a Form A each time you are paid for pension and locum work. Form B is where you record all locum pensionable pay from 1 calendar month and submit all forms to PCSE and the payments to NHS England. If you entered a contract for service to work every Monday, Tuesday and Wednesday in August 2023, you would enter all 5 periods as follows. From the 1st of August to the 2nd of August in the first box. As the 31st of July is a Monday, that would then go on a separate form for July. So the only ones that you would put in this particular example is any dates that relate to August. Then you would go from the 7th to the 9th, 14th to the 16th, 21st to the 23rd and 28th to the 30th. So as you can see on the example on the screen, you have all periods of employment listed on the same form. As I've just briefly mentioned, if your work does span 2 calendar months with no breaks, then you must record and invoice each month separately. So for example, if you work the 17th of March 2023 to the 17th of April 2023, you should record March dates on one Form A and April dates separately on a separate form. It is best practice to record your monthly information on separate forms, and due to the end of the financial year, this is very important for the months mentioned of April and March. And we're just going to touch about what is and isn't pensionable. A GP locum is a fully qualified GP that works in a hospital or a doctor's surgery in another GP's absence. You may have a period of employment recorded as officer membership, dependent on the organisation and their structure. Examples of GP locum work which are not pensionable include the following. Work that's been arranged and paid through a locum agency or limited company. Private non-NHS work performed on behalf of a GP or an out-of-hours provider. Working a long-term fee-based arrangement where the locum chose to be a type 2 practitioner for pension purposes, then treat you as a sessional GP and you do not need to complete the GP locum forms. A GP provider working as a GP locum in their own practice, and also a GP locum work performed more than 10 weeks ago. If you as the member and as the locum have any queries on what may or may not be pensionable, you can direct these to NHS Pensions, and the email address for that is nhsbsa.pensionsmember@nhsbsa.nhs.uk. Thanks, Debbie.
Lovely, thanks Vicky. So now we are going to play a video that Mark has kindly recorded for us. So this is him showing him complete a Locum A form. So I'll just play this for you now.
Hello, my name is Mark Coley. I'm on the BMA Sessional Committee and I'm going to show you how to complete a Locum A form using Primary Care Support England's portal. So the first thing to do is to navigate to the portal. And then once on the home page, log in. and then navigate to the Pensions and Payments section and into Pensions. The Locum A and Locum B forms can be found within the Locum Work section, so we go in there. This is where we'll need to go to enter the Locum A forms. Locum B forms can be entered here, and the listings of all the forms we've submitted previously can be found here. So let's go to Locum Form A Income Entry. We need to work our way down from the top of the screen downwards, so pick the pension year that's applicable. Leave this on no. RMS is for Revalidation Management Service, so this is normal locum work that I'm doing in a practice, so I leave that on no. This area here will be populated as and when I enter details further down the screen. So let's say I work for a couple of days on one practice, so I type in the practice name and find the relevant practice from the list. And then in this section under here, I need to put in the dates I worked and the fee associated with those date ranges. So let's say I worked one day in June. Let's put the date in. And let's put a fee in here for that day. Press tab and it will auto-complete the pensionable amount from my fee. If I worked another day in that same practice, I can just add another record. And then I get to pick a different date. So let's say I worked on the 28th. Then I put the fee in again, press tab, it auto completes the pensionable element. If I'm happy that that's all the entries I need to do for that practice, I then press save. And then that information pops up at the top with a summary of all the totals. And then I can enter details for another practice. So if I worked at this practice on a different date in June, so I can pick the date for that one. Again, put the fee in, press tab, and then press save. So if I did 2 days at one practice and 1 day at another practice, we then find in the list at the top the 2 practices I worked in, the associated fees and the associated pensionable amount. If I'm happy with that, I tick the box to say that everything is correct, and then I press submit. Locum A forms will be sent off electronically to those 2 practices, and whoever's able to authorise those will then authorise them. And then after that, it will be time to complete a Locum B form, and there's another video which will show you me doing that for previous month's work.
Okay, so as you've just seen, it was really simple for Mike to complete the Locum A form through PCSE Online, and as he said, once that form has been submitted, a notification will then be sent to the practice. Now, the practice will receive a notification, and it will be the Locum approver at the practice that will need to approve these forms. Now, once they receive a notification, they will receive an email and a notification through PCSE Online that a form has been sent into the practice. And once that form has been approved, the GP submitting the form will also receive a notification to let them know that it has been approved. Now, a reminder notification will be sent to the approver after 8 weeks after the end date of the period of engagement if it hasn't been approved. So we do send them a notification if something has been missed. And it is the Locum approver role that is required in PCSE Online. So I'm just going to quickly show you a little bit of a demonstration on how a notification is received at the practice. So it'll turn up in the messages in PCSE Online, so they'll just simply select the messages, which will bring up all the Locum A forms that have been submitted to the practice. And in order for them to view that form, they will simply click Review. And then that will bring up the Locum Form A approval screen. And then, as you can see, they will simply just need to confirm that all the details that have been submitted by the GP are correct. Then they can either reject or approve the form, and then they just simply click Submit and then confirm. So it is really simple for the practice to approve the Locum A forms that have been submitted. It's just a case of them making sure that they've got the correct role in PCSE Online. But yeah, I'm just going to show you another video now of Mike completing the Locum B form.
Hello, my name's Mark Coley. I'm on the BMA Sessional Committee and I'm going to take you through the completion of a Locum B form. So first of all, you need to connect to the Primary Care Support England's website and then log in. And then once logged in, you need to choose the option to do with GP pensions and payments. Then press the pensions button. And inside the locum work section, this is the area where you can enter Locum A forms, Locum B forms, or have a look at the locum listings which are already in the system. So we're going to enter a Locum B form. So we start from the top of the form and work downwards. So the work that I'm going to submit was done in May. So I picked May in the financial month. And then it wasn't appraisal work, it was practice work. So I pressed the non-appraisal claims button. And then this bit shows me the Locum A forms which have already been accepted by the practices. So I wish to include these in this month's Locum B. So when I put the ticks on there, they get brought down. And the grand total of my income for that month for locum work is shown in this top box. I then pick which tier would be applicable for the year. And then the number at the bottom is the number that I need to pay to pensions, and that includes the employees and the employer's contribution. Once done, I press submit. It asks if I'm sure I wish to submit. I confirm that. Wait for a moment. And then it's been submitted. The next step then is to make payment using online banking, and then I also need to go into the portal and update the fact that I've paid. I'll show you how to do that in a minute.
Lovely. So thanks to Mark for showing us how to complete the Locum B form. I'm now going to hand you over to Katrina, who works in the GP pensions team at PCSE, and she's going to run through a couple of points that were mentioned from the last Locum webinar that we did. And so yeah, I'll hand you over to Katrina.
Thanks, Debbie. Evening, everyone. Thanks to Mark for those videos. So just to recap, as Debbie said, we had that webinar that we held in June and a lot of questions came out of that, and one of the objectives of tonight was to kind of look back around on some of those questions and make sure that we did have the responses for people. So a common one was about how often a Locum B form can be submitted, or essentially can more than one B form be submitted for a month, and the answer to that is yes. It might be that, you know, payment comes from one practice very promptly but a little bit later from another, so within the 10 weeks, etc. So you can essentially, when you're logged into PCSE Online, as Mark showed, you pull up any of the A forms that are already approved, so you could create a B form for approved A forms with the knowledge that you maybe still had another form to follow on, and then you would do a second B form if necessary for the month. So it's absolutely flexible to allow that. And question about what happens if a practice has not approved an A form. As Debbie said, the system is set up to automatically notify the practice if they haven't approved it, and there's only 2 weeks to go to the 10-week deadline. And you know, the pension rules are that the practice has that responsibility. So you know, if there's any issues with that, I think that's something that NHS Pensions would want to be aware of. But ultimately, the practices, we're working with them separately to working with yourselves to make sure that they've all got somebody in situ that has the approval role, and you know, we use every opportunity that we've got to make sure that we remind them of the need to approve the forms promptly. Mark's mentioned about making the payment and then going to the recording income stream, and we were just going to flag here, I guess it's probably just a reminder point rather than a question, that you'll see in a moment that when you go to the recording income stream, you're presented with the details that you need in terms of the NHS England bank account, etc., to make the BACS payment. So the process flow, especially for people that are newer to it, is to do that recording income stream bit first, but clearly Mark's an experienced hand at this and has a note of those bank account details, so there's no issue with doing it. It's just to point out that if you do the recorded income stream first on PCSE Online, as you'll see in a moment, then you'll get those details up front. And I'm not sure that the demo goes into what we call the listing screens very much, Debbie, but I think we just wanted to point out, people say, well, what is that button for? What's it all about? Is it any use to me? And it absolutely is. If you go to the button in the locum section in PCSE Online that's called Locum Listing Screen, then you will be able to see the detail of all of the locum forms that you've submitted. So I think some people understandably get kind of concerned about, well, when I was doing them on paper, I had a folder or whatever with all my paper forms. You have access at your fingertips to all of the forms that you've put through, so your A forms and your B forms, so you can take advantage of the listing screen for that. So I think that's those points. I think we're going to go on to the recorded income stream now, Debbie.
That's right, yep, thanks Katrina. I'll pop that video on just now.
Once you've made the payment using your online banking, you can then return to the menu screen and make reference to the fact you've submitted that payment. So if you go to the recording income stream box and press recording income stream, there's an option here to enter details of the locum payments you've made. So click here. All the locum Bs that you've submitted, until you reference the fact that you paid the money associated with them, will appear in this box. So the one that I just submitted was for May. That's ready for me to confirm that I've made the payment. So I click on that. That's the value that I paid. I sent the money via BACS. Helpfully reminds me of the sort code and the account number that I needed to use. And now I just confirm that I've made the payment. So I've submitted my Locum B form now, I've made the payment using my online banking, and I've now given confirmation to the pension system that I've made the payment. And that's it for this month.
So yeah, I think you probably can see there now that when people are particularly getting used to this way of working for the first time, or the first few times that they use it at least, then although it doesn't make any difference which way around you complete the steps, whether you log into your online banking first or continue on with that PCSE Online journey, the recommendation is that you do the recording income stream on the PCSE Online system first, so that's all important bank account number and sort code pop up for you, and your BACS reference that you need to use. It goes without saying that the figures need to match. So one of the common issues that we get is when somebody's completed their locum forms and through human error there's an error in the amount that's paid over. So it might be that they meant to make a payment for 600, but they've made it for 6 or 610. They've made it for 601 or something like that. And so it's just a bit of a plea really to be extra careful, because that reconciliation step that Mark showed there, then your employee contribution statement on PCSE Online will automatically be updated when we've confirmed that the payment's been received into the NHS England bank account. The PCSE receive a list of transactions from NHS England every week for all of the payments that have been made to NHS England in the previous week. And when we go through that list every week, and those forms such as that Mark's just shown, then it's very straightforward to match that payment to the transaction, and that's what then updates your employee contribution statement on PCSE Online, so you can see that that's actually been fully recorded on your PCSE Online record. I've already mentioned that you can see the forms themselves in terms of the data around the dates worked and the individual amounts for individual Locum A's, all on that listing button. There's a couple of really practical points to flag really in relation to how the forms are submitted or how payments are made in particular. The one practical one is that then NHS England will be ceasing the kind of processing of checks in the very near future. So we have been communicating to the very small number of locum GPs who do or who have been making payment by cheque rather than backs, that needs to switch to backs at the moment, and that the recommendation is that from October that they cease submitting any checks. It will not be at all possible to process any checks from April 24, and we're very keen that that's not a shock to people, and that's why the messaging is going out to encourage people to stop using checks, or has been going out to encourage people to stop using checks from October 23. It does affect a very small number of locum GPs, relatively speaking, and it might be that none of you on the call tonight have ever contemplated sending a cheque to NHS England, but just in case you have, then make sure that you are using backs going forward. But having said that, the more exciting bit associated with all of that is that from April 24, then there's going to be some new functionality on the PCSE Online system where there'll essentially be a pay now button. So where Mark showed us when he got to the end of his B form and he said, look, this is the amount that it's calculated, so I know how much I need to pay, and then he had to go on and do that recording income stream bit. Then when it gets to it's calculated how much he needs to pay, before he clicks submit, it will then display a pay now button, and what that will do is it will connect the locum GP through to gov.pay. And gov.pay, you might be familiar with it from other areas, but that's an online payment mechanism where that will then pop up with a screen that shows the amount to be paid, which will be taken direct from the calculation of the contributions. So there'll be absolutely no margin for error or any manual sort of mistakes. And the locum GP will then be required to put their debit card or whatever details, debit or credit card actually, details into that gov.pay system. That all goes securely through there, so that's completely outside of Capita, but the data feeds back through then to confirm that payment has been made. So it feeds back through to the PCSE system, and that will then allow the locum record to be updated automatically. So it will be easier from a locum perspective because you won't, for locums who use PCSE Online, because you won't need to do that recording income stream step that Mark showed, and you'll also have the knowledge that you don't need to wait for the backs payment to kind of make its way through to the list that PCSE get, and then for PCSE to match that up to the forms that you've completed online. There's no, that kind of 2-3 weeks delay or on average the time that it takes for those processes all to be joined up. That will no longer be the case. So from April, if you are using PCSE Online, then you will see that gov.pay option, and that's how you will make your payments. You will no longer pay by backs. Now, for those people who, I think there's a question later on, but I'll probably skip to it now because there might be people worried, Debbie, at the minute that we're going to say this is all mandatory. It's not. So just for reassurance, we think these are all useful steps and beneficial improvements, but it's not mandatory, just to make that clear. So it's still possible to submit, and still will be possible even from April 24 to submit locum forms using our Contact Us form. For locum GPs who continue to use that route, at the point of April 24, there won't be a gov.pay solution to that. It will be continuing to pay by backs as people do now. But obviously the PCSE Online option will contain that improvement, which I hope is something that people who do use the solution will see a benefit from and welcome. So I think that kind of covers what I was going to say about that, Debbie.
Yep, that's right. So we have come to the end of the official slides, if you will. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, we hadn't put the Q&A function on yet because the last time we did the locum webinar, we got inundated with lots of questions and we wanted to kind of cover those within the presentation. So that's what we're going to do now. So we're going to run through a lot of the pre-populated questions that we've already had that came from the last webinar. And once we've gone through these, we will open up the Q&A. So please don't panic if you feel that some content hasn't been delivered during the presentation. Hopefully, with the questions that we have got preset now, you will get some answers. So I'm going to hand you back over to Katrina to run through this slide, because one of the common questions that we got was what form do they need to complete for end of year? So if I can hand back over to you, Katrina, to run through that for us, please.
Yeah, thanks, Debbie. So as you said, there's sometimes people are not clear on what they need to do in terms of end of year forms. So we've tried to colour code this. I really apologise to anybody that has any colour vision deficits, but the top row is all the same colour for type 1. The second two rows, sorry, row 2 and row 3, second 2 isn't a thing, is it? Row 2 and row 3 are all type 2, and the bottom is the one category of not needing a form. So type 1, anybody who's a GP partner, regardless of whether they only work in practice or they also carry out any solo work, any locum work, or solo and locum work along with being a partner. Partner means that you need to complete the type 1. Type 2, then if a GP has a salaried role in a practice, if they are salaried and they also do solo work or also do locum work, or they do all three, then they all have to complete a type 2 form by virtue of being a salaried GP, but also GPs who purely do solo work, so it might be out of hours, it might be for an ICB, it might be out of hours appraisal, all sorts together. If it's only solo work, you also need to complete a type 2, and if a GP who does solo work also does some locum work, then that they've decided to pension, then that also gets included in the type 2. So the only category of GPs who don't need to complete an end of year form are GPs who only do locum work. So, but you know, hopefully this kind of summarises it for people, and I believe we've got this slide or a version of it on our website, haven't we, as well, Debbie?
Yeah, we do. Okay, so following on from the questions, just a couple of key points that if you could run through those with us as well. There's something that we found on the last webinar.
Yeah, I think we tried to pull out the most commonly asked ones, didn't we? So there is an annual cycle. NHS Pensions publish the end of year forms type 1 and type 2 every year, so they're pension year specific, and they are published generally about early December, I think, colleagues. So then the forms have a deadline of the 28th of February the following year, if you like, to be submitted. So for example, 21-22, then the deadline for submitting the 21-22 type 1 or type 2 form was the 28th of February 23. So forms were published in December 22, and then the deadline was end of February 23. We do often get asked what happens if we don't meet that deadline. Then there is still the opportunity to submit the forms late, if you like, and you know they will make it into the processing stream. And you know, it just means that deadline of the 28th of February is set so that everything that is processed in relation to certificates submitted by that deadline is aiming to the summer TRS refresh. So PCSE have to make sure everything that's processed, all the certificates that are received by the 28th of February are processed in time for our cut-off, or the cut-off that NHS Pensions set for the summer TRS refresh. The consequence of not meeting that deadline would mean that it would be later than that TRS would be updated. We do get asked about missing years, so missing years being where you potentially submitting your 21-22 certificate, but actually there's a gap in your record because you either never submitted, say, 19-20, or when you did submit it, it couldn't be reconciled at the time and it's still kind of left outstanding and needs to be sort of updated and resubmitted. So there are pension year specific forms on the NHS Pensions website, and there is also an amnesty form for the very old years, but the actual forms themselves, the PDF versions, Excel versions, are all found on the NHS Pensions website, but the pension years from 15-16 onwards can also be submitted via PCSE Online. So I think that answers those questions, Debbie.
Lovely, thank you, Katrina. So just having a look of what's coming next. So another key topic that we had was around annualisation, and I believe our NHS Pensions colleagues are just going to run through some typically asked questions with us.
Thanks, Debbie.
Thanks, Vicky.
So basically, we're just going to talk around annualisation and give you an example. The example that we're going to give is just for GP locums only. Anybody who does other kind of GP work, it doesn't necessarily apply. It could be slightly different, but this example is just for a locum. So annualisation is the process of uprating pensionable pay where a member hasn't worked a full 365 days in a pensionable year. And this is applicable to any practitioner member in the 2015 scheme. So it doesn't apply in the 1995 or 2008. Any GP can be subject to annualisation. As I said, however, the example that I'm going to do is just solely GP locum only. So to calculate your annualised pay, it would be your pensionable pay divided by the number of days of pensionable employment that you've worked, and then times that by 365 days. So for an example, if a GP locum works 5 days in each month of any pension year between April to March, therefore they've got 60 days of GP locum work throughout the year. The total pensionable pay for the 60 days of the work would work out at £18,000. So to calculate the annualised pay, you would divide the 18,000 by your 60 days that you've worked, and then times that by the 365 days in the year. That would give you a full annualised pay of £109,500. When you're looking at setting your tier rate, you need to take account of all non-working days for the remainder of that year. So it doesn't always mean that GP locums will automatically pay the highest tier rate. What you'd have to do is work out your annualised pay first, and if it then works out that it's more than 75,633, that's currently based on the current tier rates, they will then pay the maximum tier rate of 13.5. And when calculating annualised pay, the regulations do confirm that the pensionable earnings are used in the calculations. It is a bit of a tricky topic sometimes to get your head around, and if you do need examples of how to work it out, you can always contact the pensions member helpline on the email address I gave earlier in the presentation.
Lovely, thank you, Vicky.
Thanks, Debbie.
Okay, so as discussed, we have got some more commonly asked questions. So I'm going to hand this back over to, I think it was Katrina or Vicky. You want to help us out on these ones? So we've got 6 questions. I think we are going to start opening the chat function soon. So Mike and Krishan can have a look and see what questions we want to be published. Yeah, so
I'll pick these up, run through these quick. We have covered a lot, or at least Vicky has covered a lot, but there's bound to be other questions. So just briefly, solo work isn't something that is well understood, so we get asked it a lot, and the difference between that and locum work. But the definition that we've taken from NHS Pensions website is that it's fee-based self-employed ad hoc work. So for example, out of hours work, or if somebody works as a clinical lead for an ICB or GP appraiser, it's work such as that that's carried out by a GP provider or a surgery-based salaried GP. Tier rates, Vicky's just touched on the tier rates there. There is comprehensive information on the NHS Pensions website in the Member Hub, which sets out the table of tier rates for the current year, but also the tier rates for previous years if anybody has an older certificate that they need to submit, and the special 22-23 year where we had that lovely split halfway through the year. The next point was about how, and I think, well, Vicky's example on annualisation was about locum, wasn't it, really? So, but this question was about, well, if I've got work that isn't pensionable, I've been paid for this work, but it wasn't pensionable, should I be including that when I'm calculating what tier rate I need to apply? And the answer really to that is a straight no. It's only pensionable work that should be included in the calculation. I covered this question forward because I thought when I was talking about the gov.pay, people might get worried. So as I said earlier, PCSE Online isn't mandatory and the Contact Us form can still be used by those who wish to carry on with that. If you're a salaried GP, can I pick and choose to pension a locum work? And again, clarification on that is yes, that if a type 2 salaried GP works as a freelance locum, then they need to sort of positively decide to pension that, and they would then submit Locum A and B forms should they decide to do that. And I think the bottom question is kind of linked to that, maybe the other way around. So if I've decided not to pension some of my locum work and I'm a salaried GP, do I include that work on my type 2 form? You absolutely don't, because that will cause you and everybody else no end of confusion. So you only include any GP locum income that has been pensioned when you're completing the type 2 form if you're a salaried GP. So I think that's our questions, Debbie. I think we're back to you.
Yeah, that's right. So we have now reached the time where we are going to start the live Q&A. So we have seen some questions come through. So just bear with me. Let's see. So I've got one question that's been published. Is appraiser work solo work then?
Hi, thank you. I'll take that. Hi, my name is Christian Agawal. I'm a Deputy Chair of the Pensions Committee at the BMA. So, appraisal work depends upon whether you have another type 2 role. So if you're solely a locum, GP appraisal work is considered locum work. If you have a type 2 role, as been discussed in the presentation, so for example, you're a salary GP or you do out of hours, any other type 2 work, then that appraisal work then becomes type 2 work as well. So effectively, it depends on what other roles you have, which determine whether your appraisal work is considered solely to be locum work or type 2 work. Hope that helps.
It's fantastic. Thank you very much. So it says, on my PCSE Online account, it has not auto-populated my NHS pension number, and I am unable to add my pension number. How can I rectify this, or who can I contact to put this onto my PCSE Online account so I can submit my Locum A forms, please?
So that's a kind of PCSE specific one, Debbie, so I'll take that one. So that is where you need to contact the PCSE Customer Service Centre. I think in the follow-up information we usually send out the details, don't we? But it's best to call up and explain that situation. Have your pension scheme membership number, SD number at hand, and that needs to be added into the system. I'm assuming that potentially you're a recently qualified GP or there's some other circumstance that means that we don't have that loaded into the system. But yeah, just contact us and we get that done. Thank you.
Thanks, Katrina. And another question that we've had posted is, when using some locum platforms, for example, NASGP and others, they automatically help generate locum forms A and B. These have thus already been signed off by the practices. How do we transfer these over to PCSE without having to redo it on PCSE Online?
Okay, so I thought it's a good question, that, because I think from the last webinar we had quite a few attendees who said they used a platform to create their locum forms, and then they would use the Contact Us form to submit to us. So it is possible, but I can accept and understand that it's not palatable to take the information from those forms and key it into PCSE Online. I think there are one or two people that do that, but I appreciate that seems like a complete double effort. So there are some discussions with some of the providers about whether in future there's a way of getting the data straight into the system, and there's some, the providers are looking at this very closely, and PCSE and NHS England are engaging with them. So it's a bit of a watch this space on that one, but we do appreciate that it's something that would be a big improvement in the future.
That's great. Thank you, Katrina. I've got another one that's come through. So what should locums do if they requested to resubmit locum form A and B that were posted in and not visible on the locum work screen?
Do I need to take that one? So I think from there, probably omitted to mention when I talked about not sending in checks. So when I mentioned about no longer submitting checks, then I should have been clear that that also means not to submit locum forms by paper. So again, and I've said it a few times, for anybody that doesn't want to use PCSE Online, then the Contact Us form is available there for you to upload the PDF essentially of the locum forms that you submit. So if there is anything that you've submitted already, then the recommendation is always that people keep copies of anything that they've submitted, and particularly by post. Obviously, if you've submitted it electronically, you have the record, so you would need to resubmit that, and all the risk around paper and paper moving around the country and from place to place, then ultimately if we take paper submissions out of the equation, then that problem goes away.
Lovely, thank you, Katrina. And the next question, so it's a two-part question, this next one. So it's been asked, so Locum is a popular online locum work platform. Is this classed as an agency, as agency work is not pensionable?
So I'll take that, thank you. So Locum actually isn't an agency. What Locum is an organisation which is a meeting place of practices and locum GPs, and therefore it is not classed as an agency, and any work that you do through Locum is actually pensionable.
Fantastic. So we do have a part 2 to this question. If we have an accountant, do we still complete our own Locum B forms, or do accountants do the pension sums?
So the responsibility is for the Locum GP. You need to do the relevant Locum A and Locum B forms. These, as Mark has shown, are quite simple. If you choose to do the paper forms via the Contact Us, similarly, they are quite straightforward. And I would really strongly recommend that you do this yourself and maintain a copy of all your records for future reference, rather than your accountant.
That's great, thank you. And the next question is, work in extended hours included in the solo work?
It very much depends on how that extended hours is set up. So, for example, if it's through an out-of-hours organisation, it would be solo work. If it is via a salaried role in a GP practice, it would be solo work. If you're doing it as a locum shift, then it would be locum work. So it very much depends on, number one, how you are doing it yourself and how the role of the actual extended hours is set up.
That's great, thank you. And the next question, so if my locum work is paid into a limited company, is that pensionable pay? If it is, can I then make my payment to PCSE from my limited company?
I can answer that one. You can only pension monies if you are working as a sole trader. So if your invoice comes as a sole trader, then you can pension it. If your invoice comes from a limited company, then you're not allowed to pension it. Those are the pension scheme rules.
That's great, thank you very much for that. Lovely. So I've got the next question. Given the cost of living crisis, can I ask what the process is if GPs wanted to completely opt out of the NHS pension? Who do we contact and how do we get the pension pot we have accrued so far refunded to us? Would it be as a lump sum payment?
So I'm not sure if the NHS pensions team will answer it, but I'll take a little bit of it.
I can say that one. On NHS
okay.
Pension.
Can I just make one comment before you begin, if I may? For anyone considering leaving the NHS pension, I would just recommend, I appreciate there is a cost of living crisis and I appreciate the contributions may seem a lot of money, but the NHS pension is actually a very valuable scheme and it is essentially deferred pay. If you are considering leaving the scheme, get really good financial advice, and once you've got that, get a second opinion. Because it actually, even though those contributions may seem high, what those are worth to you in later life is extremely important. And I can't emphasize that enough, particularly for those individuals who are on lower earnings. And we've done this modelling in the BMA and demonstrated it many times that actually the benefits are quite great. And there are also other benefits such as death in service, ill health, retirement. So it's really important to get really good financial advice from someone who really understands the NHS pension scheme. Sorry, Elizabeth.
That's okay. I was just going to say the same thing. You really need to consider what you're doing if you want to opt out. If you do want to opt out, you obtain the form off the NHS BSA website, the NHS Pensions website, complete that, and it's an opt-out form called SD502. You can only get a refund as well if you have less than 2 years in the scheme. If you haven't got 2 years in the scheme, it is deferred until your retirement age. You could transfer it out to another scheme. If you are over minimum pension age, you could take it as a payment pension and convert some of that pension into a lump sum.
Lovely. Thank you so much. I am so sorry. I am now going to end the webinar. We could have done with an extra hour or two for questions. So again, I just want to say thank you to all the PCSE colleagues, BMA colleagues and NHS Pensions colleagues that have helped out with this webinar today. It's been great to get everybody together to be able to answer all these questions. We will be sending out an email for feedback on how you think this session went this evening, so please look out for that email and please do provide us honest feedback. It helps us shape any future sessions. And also we will be looking at all the questions that have been sent in, and we will be looking at getting some written responses sent out to everybody. But once again, thank you so much for joining, and I hope you all found that useful. Okay, have a nice evening, everybody.